Welcome everyone to this 4-part Blender tutorial series where I'm going to show you how to create this rocky river nature animation in Blender. So this is part 1, and in this part we are going to be modeling the ground, and we're going to be adding displacements to the ground to add the rock texture. Then we're also going to add the river water object. We'll also add a camera to the scene, and then we'll be adding the main rocks, which are the main focus of the scene. Then in part 2 we're going to be doing all of the lighting for the scene, and we're also going to be doing the materials. So we'll add the material to the ground, and we'll also add a material to the rocks. And then in part 3 we're going to be creating some large rocks and some small rocks, and we'll put those different rocks in some collections in Blender's outliner, and then we're going to be using geometry nodes to distribute the rocks on the rocky surface. And then finally in part 4 we're going to be animating the scene. We'll do the rendering and the compositing, and then video edit the final scene together with some sound effects. Now I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine for this tutorial because I'm going for realism, but if you want to, you could use Blender Eevee, and Blender Eevee will render faster when rendering the animation, but I'm going for realism, so I'll be using Cycles. And if you enjoy this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. And on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get access to 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, and other Blender content on my Gumroad and Patreon. And another great way to help support the channel is by purchasing the finished tutorial files. So I'll have the links to that in the description. Now, if creating realistic environments in Blender is something that you want to get better at, then I can highly recommend checking out CG Boost's course, Master 3D Environments in Blender. I've reviewed the course myself and I can highly recommend it. It's a very detailed course on creating 3D environments with Blender. And I do have an affiliate link to the course in the description, so if you purchase the course through my link, then I'll earn a small commission, and that's also a great way to help support this channel. The course is taught by Martin Kleckner, who is a very skilled 3D artist. One thing that I love so much about the course is that it's very well organized and it's split up into short videos. So if you're short on time, or if you're just searching for a specific tool or workflow, then you can jump to that video in the course. Now this course is geared for intermediate Blender users. So if you're very new to Blender, then this course might be a little bit hard to follow because they're not going to go over every single shortcut key and every single button that's pressed. They're going to be going over the main workflow for creating different environments. So it's a really great course for intermediate users, but it may not be the best for beginners. Now the course goes over many different methods to create 3D environments in Blender. So the course shows you how to create environments using the ANT landscape add-on. It also shows you how to create environments using procedural materials or displacements or textures, and it also shows you how to create environments using geometry nodes. And it also covers how to create environments using a few other methods like some Blender add-ons. And the course also goes over how to create many different environments in Blender, like a realistic snowy mountain, a desert scene, some Arctic glaciers, some different landscapes with trees, and the course even covers how to create realistic water and clouds. So I can highly recommend this course for anyone who wants to learn realistic 3D environments in Blender. So again, you can check out the course with my affiliate link in the description, and if you do purchase the course through my affiliate link, then I will earn a small commission, and that's a great way to help support this channel. So before we start creating the artwork, I'm going to go over all the resources that I'm going to be downloading to create the artwork. And I'll have the links in the description to all of the different resources, and they're all completely free. So to get some nice realistic environment lighting in the scene, I'm going to be downloading this Kloppenheim 06 HDRI from polyhaven.com. So right up here you can click on the resolution and you can download the 1K version, and I'll also download the HDR version. Now depending on where you place your camera in the final scene, then you might be able to see some of the sky in the HDRI, and so if you're going to be able to see the sky in the background, then you may want to download a higher quality version like maybe the 4K or the 8K. So in the first shot here, you can't really see the sky very well. It's kind of blurred and it's kind of in the background, so I just downloaded the 1K version. However, in this other shot right here, you can see the HDRI in the background much better. So for that, I downloaded the 8K version so that the background wasn't quite as pixelated. So you can just download the 1K version unless you're going to be able to see the sky in the background really well, and in that case I would either download the 4K or the 8K. And then for the rocky gravel ground surface, I'm going to be downloading this Rocks Ground 05. Again, this is on polyhaven.com, and I just chose the 4K version and I set this to download as a zip file. And then for the texture of the rock objects, I'm going to be downloading the Rock 003, and this free texture is from Ambient CG, and I downloaded the 4K JPEG version. And then when I was creating this environment, I wanted to add some moss to the scene to give it a bit more natural elements and to give it some green colors. So I'm also going to be downloading this Moss 002 texture. Again, this is from Ambient CG, and again I downloaded the 4K JPEG version, and we're going to be adding this moss material onto the rock texture and the ground texture. And then at the very end, to give some life to the 3D environment, I'm going to be downloading 3 different sound effects from freesound.org, and all of these sound effects are Creative Commons 0. So I'm going to be downloading this river flow sound effect, and I'll also be downloading this small river sound effect, and I'll also be downloading this wood ambient sound effects with some birds. Now, similar to my sci-fi airlock corridor tutorial series and my birdhouse nature animation tutorial series, I'm not going to be saying every single shortcut key and every single button that's pressed, and I will be going a little bit faster. So if you're very new to Blender, then you might have a hard time following along with this tutorial series, but as long as you know some basic shortcut keys and basic navigation and basic modeling, then you can definitely follow along with this tutorial. The entire thing still will be step by step and in real time. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and I have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing. And then because I'm going for a realistic result, I am going to be using the Cycles rendering engine, but if you want to, you could use Blender Eevee, but Cycles will look much more realistic, so I'm going to be using Cycles. So let's just start by selecting everything, and then using the X key, we can click on delete. So we're now going to be adding a new object, so let's go here to mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. And then I want to make this plane much bigger, so I'll hit S to scale, and I will type in 8 and then enter. And then I want to make this plane longer so that the scene goes farther back, so I'll also scale this plane. I'll scale it on the y-axis, and I'll type in 2 and then enter, so it is double as long. And now that we've scaled this, I want to press Ctrl A, and I want to apply the scale, so this is now the object's new default size. So let's now go into edit mode, and this object here is going to be the main ground object. So I want to add a little dip here in the center, which is going to be the river, and then I also want to add much more details so that we can add the displace modifier. So in edit mode, I'll add a loop cut with Ctrl R, and I'm just going to left click and right click so that it's right there in the center. Then I will select everything with the A key, and then using the object context menu, I can subdivide the mesh. And then right above me, if you click on that little subdivide setting, here on the number of cuts, I'm going to turn this up to 100 so that it is very detailed. So I can now hold down the Alt key, and then I can select right here, and that is going to select the loops, and I just want to select this middle loop. So you can turn on the proportional editing. You can click right here or use the O key, and then I'll bring this down, and I'll bring it down on the Z axis, and I want to scroll my mouse wheel up to make the proportional editing bigger. And then once I bring that down, I can also scale it, and I'll scale it down on the Z axis, and I'm going to flatten this down so that the edges of the river are a bit flatter, and I'll scale that down a bit more. So I now want to go back into edit mode of this mesh, and I'll hold down the Alt key and just select that loop right there, and I want to bring it out a bit so that the side of the river is a bit longer. And then I can also select this loop here, and I'll bring it out, use the proportional editing, kind of make that a bit smaller, and just make the sides of the river a bit longer. And then using the object context menu, I'll shade the object smooth. Now I want this river to be rotating over to one side, so I'll go to top view, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and then again hold down the Alt key and just select that loop right there. And then I want to rotate this over, so I'll just rotate this, and I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel to make the proportional editing much bigger, and I'm going to rotate the whole river over. And I can also bring the river over, maybe scroll the proportional editing down a bit, and then rotate it over again, and kind of bring it out and kind of rotate it over. I can also use the Alt key to select that loop of vertices there at the end, and I can rotate this over and bring it out as well. And then I want to give the river a bit more of a random shape, so I'm going to select a few random vertices here, and I'm just going to move them around just so that the river is a bit more random, and we will be adding a displacement texture to make this look more detailed and kind of give it a rocky texture. But I just want to make the river look a bit more random, kind of playing around with this, so maybe moving a few parts up, moving some other parts down, and just making it look a bit more random and natural. So now let's go back to object mode, and I'm going to use the add menu, and we're also going to be adding a camera. And then I'll just move my view to about where I want the camera to be, and then using Control Alt Numpad 0, we can bring the camera to where we are. And if you select the camera, you can just move the camera around, and then I can also bring it back a bit. So after you hit G to grab, you can double tap the Z key, and that'll bring the camera in and out, and I'll just bring it up like that. Now in the camera view, I don't want to be able to see very much of the sky background, so I want this rocky area on the edge of the river to be coming up much higher. So I'm going to go back to edit mode, and then I'll just Alt select one of these loops here, maybe this one here, and I'll bring this entire thing up on the Z axis, just make it a bit higher. I can go into the camera view and kind of see how that's looking, and I can bring this up, and I also want to select a vertex here, and I'll bring this part down and maybe rotate it a bit and just kind of move it down, because I want this part to be kind of coming down, and I do want to be able to see a little bit of sky here in the end. So I might just want to select that entire loop again and kind of rotate it and move it out just a little bit farther, something like that. And then I can select some vertices here, kind of move that down so that the river just kind of goes down like that. And then also I can select a vertice here and kind of bring this up so that we have a bit more of those rocks and the dirt kind of coming up higher, kind of covering that other hill there. And then right here, I want to kind of select some vertices here and kind of bring them up so you can basically see what we're creating now. So we have the river right here, then we have the edge of the river right here and right over here, and then we also have kind of like a hill coming up right here. Now I want there to be kind of a clear area between the edge of the river and then this hill, so I'm also going to use the Alt key to select a loop right about there, and I can bring this down, and I'll make the proportional editing a bit smaller, and I'm going to kind of bring that down there. I could also select a loop right over here and maybe bring this down a little bit, and I could also scale everything down, scale it down on the Z-axis so it's a bit flatter. Maybe also select a vertex here, kind of pull this back a bit, and kind of bring this over a little bit. So now if I go into the camera view, you can see there is kind of the edge of where the water will be, and there's the edge as well, and the river will be down here. Now I do want to see where the water is going to be, so I'll go to the add menu, and I can add a plane. And I'll scale this plane up so it's very big, so something like that, so it's filling the entire scene, and I can also move it up and down, and so this is where the water edge is going to be. So you can now see where the water is, and I might bring the water down just a little bit more. So then I can select the land object again, and I'll go back into edit mode, and I can kind of move around the shoreline, so I can bring that down a bit, and also bring a few parts out and bring a few other parts in, just kind of making the river look a bit more natural and random. Maybe also add a few more bumps here, so if I go back into edit mode here, I can go into the camera view, just select a few vertices here, and kind of pull this around so the land looks a bit more bumpy and random. Now in the final scene, there is a little bit of the riverbed that you can see, and it's kind of underneath the camera, and the camera's focusing on some rocks which are farther into the scene, and so this little bit of land close to the camera is kind of blurred, and I think it helps to add a lot of depth to the scene, so we're going to be adding that. So let's go back into edit mode here, and I can just select a vertex right there, and I'll just bring this up, and I can scroll my mouse wheel again to change the proportional editing, and I want to kind of bring this up here and kind of move it a bit closer to the camera, maybe make this a bit bigger, and then I can also bring this part down a little bit so that we can have some water kind of going in here, and then right over here I can kind of bring this out and maybe bring it up a little bit. So we basically have a little clump of shore here, then the water comes in a bit, and then we have another little clump of the shoreline right here. And we can adjust this later once we add the displacements, but for now I just want to make kind of that bumpy part right there. So then I'll go into the camera view again, and I'm going to select the camera, and I'm going to bring the camera down on the Z-axis a bit, so now you can see we have that nice bump right there. And I might even select a vertex here and kind of bring this down a bit so that the water goes even farther kind of out of the camera view. So something like that is pretty good for now. And remember to just press Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save the Blender file. So let's now add the displace modifier, and then we'll add a texture to make the ground don't look really bumpy and rocky. So I'm going to click right here on the modifier properties. Let's click on add modifier, and I'm going to first add the subdivision surface. And right here on the levels viewport and render, I'm going to start by turning these up pretty high to like a 3. Now if this is a bit laggy, you can turn the viewport levels down to just like a 2 or a 1, but for now I'll turn this up to a 3. And so this is going to subdivide the mesh so it'll make it more smooth, and it'll also give the displacements more geometry to use. So now we can click on add modifier again, and this time we're going to add the displace modifier. So now right here on the displace modifier, let's click on new to add a new texture, and then I want to click on this button here, and this is going to take us over to the texturing panel, and I want to add in a texture for the ground. So right here on the type, make sure this is image or movie, and then we can click on the open button. And then you want to locate to the folder where you've downloaded the Rocks Ground 05 texture, and the one that I want to select is this one here. So this is the Rocks Ground 05 displacement. So I can now click on open image. Now right here on the color space, so that it works properly, I want to change the color space to non-color. Because this is a displacement texture, it needs to be set to non-color. Now we also need to change the size of the texture, and we also need to re-UV unwrap the mesh because you can see that the texture is tiling. So let's go back over here to the modifier properties, and here on the coordinates I want to change this instead to UV so that it will use the UV mapping of the object, and already you can see that's much better. So like right over here you can see there are some large rocks, and then kind of right over here there's some gravel, but I want to re-UV unwrap this. So what I'll do is just go to top view, and then I will go into edit mode, and I will select everything with the A key. I can zoom out here, and then to unwrap this you can use the U button, and I'm going to use the project from view, so it just UV unwraps it down from our view. So I can now go back to object mode, and you can see the texture has changed a little bit. So now that we've UV unwrapped this, I want to click on this UV map, and I want to make sure that it's using the UV map that we have on the object. So just choose that UV map. And then I want to change the size of this because it's much too big. So let's click right over here to go to the UV editing workspace. And you can press the A key to make sure that's all selected. And then you can select the entire UV editing. And if you want to, you can click here on the drop down in the UV editor, and you can select the Rocks Ground texture just so that you can see it in the background. So let's just now scale this up so that we can see much more of the texture. And then to see it working, I can hit the tab key to go back to object mode. So now it's adding lots of detail to the ground surface. Let's go back into edit mode though, and I want to scale this up even more, so I'll scale this a lot bigger, and then I can go back to object mode, and we can see how that's looking. That's pretty good, but I want to go back into edit mode again, and I want to scale this up even bigger so there's lots of detail. And then I can go back to object mode, and we'll see how that's looking. So that is looking super cool. Now you can see it has much more detail. So there's like some big rocks there, and then some gravel. And if you want to in edit mode, you could also rotate it, so I might rotate it a little bit just that it looks a bit more random, and that looks really nice. And then if there's any spots that you don't like maybe right here you want it to be more like gravel, you can go into edit mode, you can move the texture, and then you can go back to object mode, and you can see now the texture is placed in a different area. And also if you want to see this taking effect in edit mode, then you can go to the modifier properties, and you can click on this button right here on the displace modifier. So now if I move this around, you can see it's going to update in edit mode. Now it is a bit laggy, so here on the levels viewport I could turn this down to just like a 1 or a 2, and now I can move this around, and you can see even in edit mode it's going to be displacing the texture. So this is just a much better way to kind of see it updating in real time. And you can also rotate that around. And then back in object mode, I want to see this with more detail. So the levels viewport, I'll just turn this up to 2 for now. You could turn it up to 3, but it is a little bit laggy, so I'll just turn it down to 2 for now. And then the strength is a little bit strong. You can see some of these areas are very pointy. So on the strength here at the displacement, let's just turn the strength to like a 0.8, so it's not quite as bumpy. And if I turn the levels viewport up to 3, you can see now it's not quite as pointy, so that does look a bit nicer. But just for the viewport levels, I'll turn this down to 2, but then it will render at 3. So I'll now just go back here to the default layout. So now that we've added the displace texture, you can really see how the mesh is going to look. So if you want to, you can go back to edit mode, and you can select a few vertices here and there, and you can kind of move these around. So if you want to like bring this up higher, you can. So I might select a vertex there, bring this up a bit higher, and you can also kind of move this around. So if you want to bring this down into the water, you can, or bring it up and just kind of play around with this. You could also select a few vertices here and kind of pull this out just to add a little bit more detail to the the edge of the water, and also right here where you can really see it up close. If you want to like bring this down into the water, you can, or maybe bring it up a bit. So then kind of in this empty area in the river, I want to add a few very detailed rocks, and this is going to be the main focus of the scene. So to create these rocks, I'm going to be using a Blender add-on, and it's built into Blender, so let's just enable the add-on. So you can click here on Edit, and then you can go to the Preferences. And then if you click over here on the Add-ons tab, you can go to the Search, and you can search for Extra, and you just want to turn on the Add Mesh Extra Objects add-on, and then you can close Blender's User Preferences. So now that we've enabled the add-on, if you go to the Add menu, you can see there's going to be many new objects. And I'm going to click right here on the Rock Generator. So this is going to generate rocks for us. And I'll just press the period key to zoom into that rock. So then right above me, if you click here, you can open up the Add Rock settings. Now on the number of rocks here, I just want one rock, so I'm just going to make sure this is set to 1. And then right here, I want to turn off the user random seed. Now right above me, I have this user seed value, and I can change this, and this is just going to randomize the rock. So I can just kind of change the seed around until I get a rock that I like. And I actually think I like the user seed of 3, so I can now just close the Add Rock settings, and I'm just going to bring this rock right over here, and I can rotate it around, and just kind of rotate this around and stick it here in the water. And then I'll go into the camera view. Now, because you're going to be seeing this rock pretty up close, I want it to be very more detailed. So I'm going to go here to the side panel and go to the modifiers, and you can see that the add-on has added some different displace modifiers and some subsurf modifiers to give it more detail. Now I want this rock to be very detailed, so let's turn the render and viewport both up to 4, and then here on the second subsurf modifier, I'll do the same thing. So the render and viewport I'll turn up to 4. So now you can see that this is a very detailed rock, and I do want it very detailed because we're going to be seeing it pretty up close. So then I can scale the rock up bigger if I want, and I can rotate the rock around, and I just want to find kind of a nice spot where the rock can kind of poke out of the water. And if you want to, you can also go into edit mode of the rock, and you can select some of the vertices and kind of move them around, so I can like bring that down. And now if I go back to object mode, you can see the rock is a bit more flat. And then I think it would be nice to add just a few more rocks kind of in the river. So what I'm going to do is press Alt D instead of Shift D. So Alt D is going to duplicate it, but it'll keep the same object's data. And that way the Blender file will use less memory. So I can now just kind of rotate this rock around, and I can scale the rock down a bit, and I want to bring the rock farther back in the scene. So after I hit G to grab, I'll hit Shift Z to exclude the Z axis, and I can just kind of move the rock back into the scene, then also rotate it on the Z axis, just make it a bit random, kind of stick it in there. So again, I'll select the rock and I'll press Alt D to keep the same object's data, and I want to make another rock which is kind of in more the center of the river, and I can rotate this over, maybe scale it up a bit, and kind of give it a random rotation. And I think I'll add just one more, so Alt D, and I'll just bring it back here into the river and kind of rotate it around a bit and just kind of poking out of the water. So something like that. So now I have just kind of 4 different rocks. You can add as many as you want. I at least want to add these 2 here so that you have kind of a main focus for the camera to look at. Alright, so with that finished, I'll just save the Blender file again, and this is going to finish it up for part 1 of the tutorial series. So I hope you've been enjoying this so far, and thank you so much for watching. And if you're enjoying this tutorial and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, where you can get 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, and procedural materials and other Blender content. And you can also purchase the finished project files of this tutorial on my Gumroad and Patreon. I'll have the links in the description. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, then some great ways to do that are by checking out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on the join button, and you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip if you're enjoying this tutorial. So when part 2 is released, I will have the link in the description, and I'll also put part 2 right up there on the end screen when it's released. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.